Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
For the fifth year in a row, my birthday did not exist in my parents' world. Not a call, not a text, not a message in the family thread that never stays quiet for anything my brother does. And when he rolled up that afternoon on a brand new motorcycle that they had helped him pick and finance and insure, smiling like he had just discovered gravity, I felt something steady and cold settle in me that was not sadness anymore, but a decision. Because you can only be erased so many times before you stop standing where people like to wipe their feet. I had done the polite dance for years, telling myself adults do not keep score, pretending I was too busy to notice when my mom remembered a neighbor's dog's adoption date but missed mine again. Pretending I did not care when my dad posted a long speech about my brother's so-called grit because he finally showed up to a job interview on time while I was the one who helped him rewrite his resume at 2 in the morning and coached him through questions he still got wrong. I told myself it was their way, old habits, no big deal, but this time I watched them make a ceremony out of someone else's birthday, while mine still hung in the air like a joke with no punchline. And the moment that engine revved and my mom squealed like a teenager, I felt my face go blank in a way that felt like relief. Because once you stop hoping, you stop waiting, and once you stop waiting, you start moving. My brother did the rounds, hugging everyone, pointing at the custom details, talking about how freedom has a sound, and I stood there nodding while his friends slapped his back and my dad poured drinks like he had closed a merger. And I kept thinking about the last 5 years where I tried to make it easy for them, never asked for a party, never asked for a gift, only asked for a call, a message, some proof that I was not the extra chair at the edge of their table. And I realized I had trained them to treat me like an accessory, useful when someone needs a ride to the airport or a resume fix or a last-minute babysitter, but invisible when it is my day or my news or my turn. And I felt stupid for how long I stayed optimistic about people who enjoyed the benefits of me without ever paying the cost of consideration. When my mom finally noticed I was quiet, she did that soft voice she uses when she wants me to be easy, and she said we should do a family dinner soon. We have been so busy. You know how it is, and she touched my arm like that touch could erase a pattern. And I looked at her and said, of course, because it costs nothing to nod, and then I excused myself to the bathroom, not to cry, not to collect myself, but to start, and I opened my phone and scrolled through the list of accounts that quietly tie a family together when one daughter is responsible and available and too willing to be helpful. I removed my brother from the streaming services that I had been paying for because my dad never figured out the password situation and my mom liked the premium plan without ads. And I changed my contribution on the family phone plan from everyone to me alone with an end date at midnight so they would have time to switch. And I updated my work and medical emergency contacts so that if I ever get hurt, the first person called is the friend who has shown up for me every single time rather than the mother who forgets I exist until she needs a favor, and I revoked the shared roadside assistance card that my brother kept in his wallet because he always meant to get his own but somehow never did. And every click felt like I was returning pieces of myself to myself, not to punish them, but to stop sponsoring the version of this family where I subsidize respect I never receive. I sat on the edge of the tub and let myself remember every small thing I had excused, like the year my dad sent a thumbs-up emoji instead of a birthday call because he was tired, or the year my mom told me we would celebrate later and later never arrived. And I thought about how they always found the energy to plan big gestures for my brother, and how I kept telling myself I was above wanting that I did not need balloons or attention, when the truth is I did not need balloons, I needed evidence, and they kept choosing not to provide it, and if that sounds petty to anyone else, I can live with that, because I have learned there is a difference between being difficult and being done. When I came back out, everyone was in the driveway taking photos of the motorcycle like it was a baby, and my brother shouted for me to get in the shot, and I smiled and said I would take the picture so he could have one with our parents. And I framed them perfectly and hit the button and handed the phone back, and I knew I would not be in any of the photos they post from that day, which somehow finally felt correct, because the truth had been on display for years, and today it just had better lighting, and in that small clarity I felt the calm you get when you return something that never fit. On my way home, I dictated one single message in the family thread that said, "I hope the bike brings you exactly what you think you were missing. I am stepping back to protect my sanity. I will not be at family dinners or holidays for the foreseeable future. I have ended my financial support of any shared services and sent separate emails with the dates and instructions. Please do not contact me to negotiate because there is nothing to negotiate." And then I turned the thread on mute and placed my phone face down and drove in silence. And the revenge, if you want to call it that, was not cruel or dramatic or loud. It was clean and final and mine. By the time I parked, I had 3 missed calls and 2 voice messages. One from my mom saying I was being sensitive and one from my dad asking if this is about a birthday, because I am not a child, and I listened without replying. And I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and I opened my laptop to upload the receipts that prove exactly who has been paying for what for years. And as I hit save, I realized the part of me that kept expecting them to change had finally clocked out. Which is why when the doorbell rang a little later and I saw who they sent to fetch me back, the plan I had been resisting all day snapped into place, and every line in the sand I drew turned into a door I was ready to close. When I opened the door and saw Aunt Linda standing there with a casserole balanced like a peace treaty and a smile that did not reach her eyes, I understood that my parents had already decided on their version of events and had chosen a messenger who could do soft pressure with a side of guilt. So I let her speak first while I leaned against the frame and listened to the script I have heard in different costumes for years. The one where I am sensitive and busy and misunderstood, and where the solution is always a dinner somewhere neutral where we can smooth things over without anyone admitting that the smoothing is only ever demanded after I scrape myself flat to make their lives comfortable. She tried the lines about how my mother was upset, and my father was confused, and my brother was hurt that I did not congratulate him properly. And I told her calmly that he already got more applause than any adult needs, and that I was done donating my voice to a family choir that never learned my verse. And when she tried to saying that families fight and make up and that life is short, I said she was right. Life is short, which is why I will not spend another minute explaining the difference between forgetting and choosing not to remember, because one is an accident and the other is a value system. And even though her face pinched at that, she had the decency to stop pretending she did not understand. She asked what it would take to get me to come home, and I said the word home implies a place where I am seen and safe, and neither of those apply right now, and if my parents have something to say they can put it in writing like adults who are not afraid of their own words. And when she tried to leave the casserole like a token of goodwill, I handed it back, because I did not want anything in my kitchen that was being used as a substitute for an apology, which is how I knew the news would be carried back exactly as intended, and that the next round would be louder. I shut the door and turned my phone screen face up on the counter just so I could watch the notifications arrive without touching a single one. A slow parade of calls from my mother, then my father, then my brother, then my mother again. A string of messages that treated my boundary like a malfunction to be troubleshot rather than a decision to be honored. And every time the screen lit, I reminded myself that silence is not childish when you have already tried words and been ignored. It is strategy, and my strategy now was simple. No replies, no arguing, no emotional labor on demand. Just a clean wall where there used to be a revolving door. That night, because I know how my family spends its evenings and because I had timed everything while I sat on the edge of the tub feeling the steady click of my own life returning to my hands, the shared streaming accounts and the premium subscriptions they took for granted signed out on every television and tablet and phone. And while I did not see it happen, I could picture the moment my dad realized he did not know a single password, and the moment my mom realized there were no more ad-free shortcuts, and I could picture my brother cursing at the glitch he assumed was technical while I sent a tidy email with clear instructions, and the sentence, "Your continued access is a choice you can make with your own card," which is the kind of sentence that sounds polite until you are the one who has to finally pay. In the morning, I packed a small box with the spare keys they had insisted on keeping to my apartment for emergencies that always seemed to line up with a delivery window or a need to borrow something I would not have offered if asked. And I mailed the keys in a padded envelope with a note that said, "Unannounced visits are no longer welcome. Any attempt to use the building buzzer will be ignored. Please communicate through email." And while that might sound cold, I have learned that clarity is Kinder than pretending, because pretending trains people to step on you and call it a dance. At noon, my brother left a voice message in the tone he uses when he wants to be the charming younger sibling who rescues the day with a joke, and he said the bike is insured and fine and I am being dramatic and that mom is spiraling and dad is mad. And then he slid into the part where he tells me I will feel stupid once this blows over, and I found myself smiling at the way he still believed our family ran on the same settings as his life, where consequences are light and apologies are optional. And women fix the mood, so I kept the smile and kept the silence and kept the part of me that once tried to be the fixer strapped safely to the chair. By late afternoon, a cousin I love texted that she had been asked to forward me an invitation for a family dinner at my parents' house, complete with a cheerful subject line about getting back on track and a helpful list of ground rules like no raised voices and no bringing up old grievances and a suggestion that I come ready to move forward. And while I read it, I felt that new steadiness come back. The one that says I am not begging anymore, I am choosing, so I opened the family group thread. Changed its name to a title that will stick in my father's throat every time he scrolls past it, Favorite Child Budget Meeting, archived. And I posted one final message that said my attendance at any discussion will require a written acknowledgement of what was done and what will change, signed by the people who did it. And then I left the thread and turned off notifications for every number that shares my last name, which is why when Aunt Linda's second message popped up with a line that said, "Your mother insists you attend because we do not need paperwork to love each other," I already knew the escalation was coming, and I already had the receipts they were about to force me to use. By the next morning, the story had already left my mouth and grown wings of its own, because that is what happens in our family when someone refuses to play their assigned part. And I could hear the shape of it in Aunt Linda's careful follow-up message that said my mother had not slept and my father was bewildered and my brother was mortified by my behavior, which is a sentence that ought to make a normal person laugh and a grown woman roll her eyes, yet it still hit the soft spot that lives under every oldest daughter's ribs, the one that remembers how quickly the problem becomes you once you stop performing the fix. So I brewed coffee I did not want and forced myself to sit in the discomfort without soothing it for them. Because nothing good grows in a house where one person waters every plant and no one else touches a sink. By noon, the cousin I trust most called to warn me that the new talking point was that I had always been a little fragile, and that this birthday thing was me spiraling over nothing, and she sounded embarrassed to even repeat the words, which helped because it confirmed I was not crazy, and when she added that my brother had told a group of friends at a bar last night that this would blow over because mom and dad always pick him, I felt something inside me settle even further into the exact shape of what this has been. Not a misunderstanding and not a series of mischances, but a family economy where love is a coupon that only scans for one customer, and it is amazing how quickly your decisions line up once you accept that simple accounting. They move to phase 2 by late afternoon, because manipulators follow the same calendars the rest of us do, and phase 2 in our house is guilt by nostalgia, which means my mother texted a photo of me as a child standing next to a lopsided cake and wrote that she misses her sweet girl and that life is too short to be angry, followed by my father sending a message about how he always taught us to let small things go. And then my brother chiming in with a joke about how I should take a ride on his motorcycle to cool off, and even though every syllable was predictable, it still made my pulse jump in that defensive way. So I put the phone flat on the counter and said out loud that I am not angry, I am accurate, and that I am not making a point. I am making a boundary, and I promise myself that any response I give will be in the form of actions they cannot reframe with a caption about family. The first action was boring and necessary, the kind of grown-up move that protects you long after the adrenaline fades, so I placed fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus and froze my credit so that no one could open anything in my name. And while that might sound paranoid, it turned out to be exactly on time, because an hour later I received a polite call from a store card department asking to verify an application submitted with my information and my parents' address, and the woman on the line could not say more than the script allowed, yet it was enough to make me sit very still with that particular mix of disgust and relief you only feel when your worst guest shrugs and says you were right. After which I recorded the time and the number and asked for the application to be denied and noted for attempted identity misuse. And then I drafted one careful email to both of my parents that said any use of my name or credit without my written consent will be treated as fraud and handled through official channels, which is not a threat when it is a boundary with a statute attached. They shifted to phase 3 an hour after that, which is the story control phase, and it came in the form of a group message to the extended family where my mother wrote that there had been a misunderstanding involving accounts and that everything was under control. And my father added a pain line about how some people forget where they come from, and I watched those words sit there like little traps waiting for me to step on them and start explaining, but I have learned that explanations are a kind of tribute you pay to people who intend to misunderstand you. So instead of typing, I started collecting, and by collecting I mean I opened the folder where I keep backups because I am the sort of person who keeps backups. And I pulled screenshots of each birthday thread where my name did not appear, and I pulled the calendar screenshots of the parties thrown for my brother complete with custom cakes and rented patios, and I pulled the receipts that show the services I paid for and the logins I managed and the emergency calls I answered. While I was building that quiet archive, my brother called again and left a voicemail so smug it could slide off the counter, telling me I was turning something small into drama and that mom would collapse without me and that dad was threatening to cut me off from the family if I did not cut it out. And there was a moment in the middle of that sentence where he laughed and said, "This is why I win in this house," and I swear I could hear the gravel under his boots as he strutted across a life built on other people's effort, which helped more than any friend could have helped because it cured the last traces of sentimental loyalty I was still mistaking for love, and it clarified the next move in a way that felt both inevitable and surgical. So I sat down with my archive and I wrote a short, steady note addressed to the family list that did not accuse and did not dramatize and did not beg. A note that said, "Here are a few excerpts from the last years that explain my decision, and here are the dates when my support ends, and here are the instructions to assume responsibility for your own services." And then I attached 3 images. One showing a birthday where the only posts were about my brother's midweek bowling score, one showing the motorcycle bow photos with the taglines about my parents being the best, and one showing a line of payments with my name on them and their names on the usage, and I scheduled the email to send the next morning because I wanted night to do its quiet work, and then, because every act of revenge deserves a clean stage, I opened my social accounts and drafted a single post that did not name anyone yet made the pattern impossible to miss, and I saved it as a draft for sunrise, which is when the people who prefer shadows hate you most, and as I closed the laptop I heard a car door outside and recognized the impatient knock that belongs to my father, and I knew that before the sun could rise they would force the confrontation I had been timing, which was perfect. Because I had one last thing to say that would make everything after it fall exactly where it belonged. My father's knock had that old impatience baked into it, the kind that pretends urgency is love while actually just demanding compliance. So before I even unlatched the chain, I started the voice memo on my phone and set it face down on the entry table, because if there is one thing I have learned from being the person who remembers details, it is that the people who rely on your memory will always accuse you of exaggerating once it no longer serves them. And when I opened the door, he came in a step without waiting, and my mother hovered behind him with that brittle brightness she wears when she wants credit for showing up, and they went straight into the routine that has kept this family running for years. The one where he frames control as calm, and she frames avoidance as kindness, and I let them run it because I wanted every word preserved. He said this had gone far enough, and that family is not a courtroom, and that I was embarrassing them with childish theatrics over a date on a calendar, and I told him that if family is not a courtroom, then stop acting like the judge who never reads the case file. Because what I am asking for is not a trial but a receipt, and when I showed him the email draft addressed to the extended family with the 3 attachments, and the quiet line that says consider this an explanation, not an invitation to debate, he tried to scare me with the word defamation, and I said the truth has never defamed anyone, after which my mother stepped forward with the exact phrase I knew she would pick, which is, "We love you in our own way." And I answered that their way has been to forget my birthday 5 years in a row while funding a motorcycle and calling it support, and that love without evidence is just sentimental fog, which sounds harsh until you have choked on it as long as I have. I placed printed screenshots on the table not as a performance, but as a map, one showing the blank birthday threads where the only posts that day were about my brother's midweek bowling score, one showing a timeline of parties and gifts for him with cheerful captions that included my parents' names, one showing the subscriptions and services my card has carried for years complete with their profiles logged in, and one last page with yesterday's note from a store card department confirming an application attempted with my information and their address, and when my father tried to claim it must be a clerical error, I told him I had already placed freezes with all 3 bureaus and documented the call time, and that any further attempt would travel straight from me to a report, and that yes, I meant exactly that, which is when the mask slipped and he said the quiet part, that they have done more for my brother because he needs it and that I do not. And I felt that sentence slide into place, like the final piece in a puzzle I have been solving with the lights off since I was 12. I told them that by sunrise an email would go to the family list with those attachments and a caption that simply explains my decision to step back and end all shared financial ties, and that a public post would appear on my accounts that does not name anyone yet makes the pattern legible to anyone who knows us, and that I would take none of it down unless I received a written acknowledgement signed by both of them that names what they did and commits to equal treatment going forward with dates. Not vibes, including a reimbursement schedule for the last year of charges and a basic adult plan to get their own accounts, and I said I was not asking for an apology tour or a ceremony. I was asking for accountability that cannot be retrofitted into a story where I am the hysteric, and my mother said paperwork is not love. And I said then stop making me do all the paperwork that keeps this family comfortable while calling it love when I do it and ingratitude when I stop. They left without agreeing, because of course they did, and I locked the door, finished the captions, and set both messages to send at 6 in the morning because there is a moral clarity to daylight that people who thrive on whisper networks cannot stand. After which I slept better than I have in years, not because I was happy but because I was done auditioning for a part that had already been cast, and when the sun came up my phone lit like a slot machine, cousins texting "Are you serious?" and finally, and I am so sorry I did not see it, an aunt asking how she could help, a neighbor of my parents messaging me privately to say the photo evidence hurt to look at and that it matched everything she had noticed and never said. And then a flurry of furious calls from my parents that I did not answer because I am not a firefighter for other people's arson anymore. By mid-morning the first reversal arrived, 3 relatives forwarding me screenshots of a new family message where my mother wrote that she was devastated by a misunderstanding and my father wrote that I was weaponizing the internet against my own blood. And under it a few brave replies asked the straightforward questions my parents hate, like why are there no birthday acknowledgements for her, and why is there a record of her paying for your accounts, and while I watched that thread tilt away from their control I felt the smallest, sharpest relief, not because I wanted them dragged, but because I wanted the truth to stop needing my throat to breathe, and just as I was letting that land the doorbell rang again. And through the peephole I could see my mother's friend from church holding a gift bag with the corner of a discount store card poking through the tissue, which told me they had chosen the cheap shortcut they always choose when substance is required, and I slid the chain back on, while the voice memo app ticked upward and I thought, fine, let's put this on the record too. The church friend with the gift bag stood on my mat shifting from foot to foot while explaining that my mother was too emotional to come herself and that this little surprise was meant to show goodwill. And when I peeked inside and saw a belated birthday card from a discount rack, a generic candle, and a store gift card with a low number written in the corner, so I would not miss how thoughtful everyone had been, I felt something in me that used to flinch simply go quiet, so I thanked her for carrying the message, handed the bag back with both hands like a delicate object, and asked her to tell my parents that goodwill without accountability is just decoration, that my requirements had already been sent in writing, and that there would be no doorstep negotiations today, after which she nodded with the relief of someone who never wanted to be in the middle and retreated down the hall promising to pray, which I did not mock, because prayer is at least honest about what it can and cannot do. They came themselves an hour later, my father holding a grocery store cake like a shield and my mother clutching an envelope that crinkled with a cheap card and a gas receipt folded inside. And before I unlatched the chain, I restarted the voice memo and set it on the entry table because we were going to do this without amnesia this time. And the moment I opened the door, my father began his speech about how families move past nonsense and how I had humiliated them with my stunt and how the extended relatives were calling in confusion. While my mother kept saying she did not sleep and that she had already told Aunt Linda to plan a dinner and that we could make this right if I would just take down the posts and stop with the paperwork because it made her feel like a stranger. And I listened because I wanted every word on tape and also because I wanted to remember the exact sound of the thing I am never returning to. I let them finish. Then I placed 2 envelopes on the console like clean choices, the first containing a simple acknowledgement and reimbursement agreement with dates and amounts and a short paragraph committing to equal treatment going forward. Notarized by the woman waiting in her car downstairs because I do not leave signatures to trust anymore, and the second containing copies of the small claims filings I had submitted that morning with stamped case numbers and scanned attachments showing the services I had funded and the attempted application using my information with their address. And I said in the same level voice I have been practicing since I was a child that I would file a dismissal the minute the first envelope came back signed, and that I would keep every post and every archive live until then, because truth is not a bargaining chip. And when my father barked that I would not dare serve my own parents, I gestured toward the stairwell where the process server I had hired stood, visible through the glass with a clipboard and a neutral face, and I said, I do not dare, I simply do, because that is the only language you have ever respected. There is a look a bully gets when the rules finally apply to him, and it passed across my father's face in a single ugly wave, followed by the practiced outrage that used to make me shrink and now just made me tired. While my mother's eyes filled and she told me I was ice and that I had let the internet poison me against my own blood. And I told her I had let evidence clarify what loyalty had blurred, and that this was not revenge so much as quitting a job I was never paid to do, and when my brother burst up the stairs 2 minutes later, because of course he had been idling nearby, he tried to swagger past the threshold with a line about how I was not going to blow up our family over a birthday, and I said slowly that I was not blowing anything up. I was refusing to keep supplying the fuel. Then I handed him a printed sheet with the dates through which I had subsidized his access and a list of the passwords he would need to change on his own card, and I watched the humor fall off his face when he realized I had thought of every angle he likes to pretend does not exist. My father refused to take the papers at first because pride is just fear with a suit on, but the process server did his job with quiet professionalism and a timestamp, after which the room changed temperature. Because paperwork is the only climate our household ever acknowledged, and my mother tried one last angle with the classic line that paperwork is not love. So I answered that love without paperwork is how I ended up carrying the entire administrative spine of this family while being told my needs were dramatic and that if they wanted warmth they could start by generating their own heat, and then I slid the grocery store cake back into my father's hands and returned the envelope with the gas receipt to my mother, telling them both that while I appreciate the gesture, it arrived 5 years and 1 motorcycle too late, and that I do not accept apologies that ask me to pretend the debt never existed. When they finally left, my hallway smelled like frosting and indignation, and I let the door latch fully before I allowed myself to breathe. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote the last message I will ever send to the family list. A clear and boring note that said I will not be attending any dinners, that communication from this point forward should be by email with the subject lines indicated in the agreement, that any attempt to contact me through friends, neighbors, or employers will be forwarded to council, and that once the reimbursement schedule begins I will archive the public posts as a courtesy and not as an admission, after which I closed the laptop, turned off the voice memo, and poured myself water because I wanted the smallest possible ritual to mark the moment I became my own emergency contact in full. The pathetic part, the piece I had promised in the title and that delivered itself without me lifting a finger. Arrived that evening when my mother texted a photo of a hastily assembled living room scene with a salvaged banner and a cake with my name misspelled and a caption about how they had tried to surprise me if only I had answered the door like a loving daughter. A message clearly crafted for forwarding and pity, and instead of fury, I felt that same quiet again, because there it was, the proof that they had never understood what was required. They had only understood how to look like they had tried, so I saved the image, replied once with the line "Please refer to the agreement for next steps," and muted the thread for good. Then I put my phone face down and let the stillness arrive, not as a threat or a performance or a cliffhanger, but as the final move of a plan that did not need applause to count as a win, because I did not steal anything from them or break anything they could fix. I simply ended the subsidy, named the pattern, and walked out on a system that only ran when I fed it, and for the first time in years I did not wonder whether I had gone too far. I just thought that was epic and exactly enough.